John Cage Jr. was a composer, music theorist, writer, and artist. He was the avant-garde composer whose unorthodox ideas significantly influenced 20th century music. John Cage was born in Los Angeles on September 5, 1912. His father, John Milton Cage, was an inventor, and his mother, Lucretia Harvey, was an editor who he considered to have a sense of society and was never happy. Cage was never interested in music growing up in his Episcopalian family. As a young child, he had aspirations to be a minister, and it wasn't until later till he decided he wanted to be a writer. He attended Pomona College for 2 years until he dropped out to go to Europe, where he stayed for 18 months. It was at this time which he wrote his first piece of amateur music. When he came back to America in 1931, he became inspired by Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. It was at this time that he started taking lessons in composition from different musicians, including Arnold Schoenberg. Schoenberg offered Cage free tutoring if he promised to devote his life to music. 2 years later, Cage quit taking lessons because he said he lacked harmony. This led him to start experimenting with percussion instruments and non-instruments. Throughout his life, John Cage had been in a few long-term relationships before he fell in love with Xenia, an artist, who he married on June 7, 1935. In 1938, Cage met Merce Cunningham at the Cornish School in Seattle. Cage said him and Xenia had an open relationship, and eventually he left to New York with Merce Cunningham. In 1945, John and his wife got divorced.
In the 1940s, Cage dedicated his life to music when he discovered that silence is not acoustic, but rather a change of mind. Most of his inspiration at this time came from Schoenberg and Cabell. In 1940, Cage invented the prepared piano, which altered sounds by placing objects on, under, or between the strings of the piano. In 1946, John agreed to teach Western music to Jita Sarabha, an Indian musician. In return, she would teach him about Indian music and philosophy. In the late 40s and early 50s, Cage became interested in Eastern philosophy and began attending lectures on Zen Buddhism. From 1946 through 1948, his study in Indian and Buddhist philosophies inspired him to compose many works such as sonatas and interludes and strings quartet in 4 parts. In the 1950s, Cage's music shifted to more of a process style. He stated that music was like an object that had no beginning, middle, or end. In 1950, John received the opportunity to work alongside the staff of Wesleyan University until his death. Still inspired in attending Zen Buddhism lectures in the early 50s, John Cage composed Imaginary Landscape No. 4 in 1951. Landscape No. 4 uses 12 radios all played at once. The piece depends entirely on the radio channels broadcast at the time of the performance for the actual sound. Cage's most famous and known piece is known as 433, which is composed in 1952. 433 is a piece in which the performers must remain silent on the stage for exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds. This piece was influenced by the white paintings of Rauschenberg and John's trip to Cambridge in the anechoic chamber at Harvard University. While at Harvard, Cage realized that silence is not the absence of sound, but the unintended operations of his nervous system and blood circulation. Also in 1952, Cage composed Water Music, which uses water and seashells. Water music was motivated by Cage's desire to reproduce the operations that form the world of sound that we can find around us. In the 1960s, Cage began writing music and literature. In 1960, he was selected as a fellow in the faculty of the Center for Advanced Studies in the Liberal Arts and Science at Wesleyan University. In 1961, Wesleyan University Press issued Silence in October, which composed of sets of John's lectures and writings on a wide range of topics from Lecture on Nothing. Silence became the first book that Cage published in 1961.
In 1967, A Year from Monday was published by the Wesleyan University Press. This book is a collection of lectures, essays, and journal writings from 1961 to 1967. 2 years later, John Cage came up with a piece called Cheap Imitation. This was his last public performance due to arthritis. Besides music, John Cage continued to pursue his interest in writing books of poetry. Then, in 1985, John suffered from a stroke. He also suffered from multiple diseases, including arteriosclerosis and sciatica. Not too long after the stroke, he had broke one of his arms and one of his legs ceased to function. During 1986, he received an honorary doctorate of performing arts from the California Institutes of the Arts. A few years later, on August 11, 1992, he was taken to the hospital due to another stroke. Unfortunately, the next morning, August 12th, he died. A year after he died, the John Cage Trust was established. The Trust's goals are to gather the works of John Cage and present them in exhibitions around the world. Even today, people from all over still learn from his books and compositions. For example, there is a couple of apps made for mobile devices, such as the 433 app and the Prepared Piano app. These apps allow you to understand as well as perform some of his famous compositions. To better grasp John Cage's outlook on everyday music, we are going to take a look at a scene from the movie August Rush. This video is also closely related to the meaning of his famous production 433. Although many people would refer to 433 as silence, it actually consists of sounds from the environment.